Hello everyone, this is Mr. McKeever, and today we're going to talk about the new Protestant faiths that come out of the Protestant Reformation. And what we're going to see is really the birth of a lot of different religions, additional ones than the original ideas that Luther had early on. And many of them are going to take a little bit different spins on where they should get their sources from, what are the principal ideologies that they should follow, and who should be the leaders or head of said churches. So let's begin with all the different faiths that come out of this period. And there is going to be a little bit of regionalism that ties to this as well too. Certain areas are going to have certain belief sets that are really different than other areas in Europe, and that really shouldn't be shocking as different peoples in different areas believe different things. Well, let's begin with one of the earliest Protestant Reformation leaders after Martin Luther, and that is going to be Ulrich Zwingli. He's going to be the leader of the Swiss Reformation. So remember, Swiss is Switzerland, and actually believed that the Reformation truly began with the ideas of Desiderius Erasmus, if you remember him from back when we talked about the Northern Renaissance. His ideas of humanism, of how to question the Catholic Church and really start to analyze the source work, was really the key piece that motivated and inspired Zwingli. So what he will do is go back to the basis idea of Erasmus, and that is the notion that the importance should be in the scripture and not in the ideologies of the church themselves. He is a huge proponent of the notion of sola scriptura. You should only have what is written in the Bible. If it is not written in the Bible, it is not the ideas of God and therefore should not be studied. So this is going to be the key piece that he really builds off of. And in regards to that, he is going to differ with Martin Luther on a lot of things. Zwingli believes that Martin Luther just doesn't go far enough in a lot of his ideas. It's great that he's willing to challenge the Pope and really question the role of the church itself, but his reluctance to really purge a lot of the Catholic concepts or Catholic imagery in churches and various other things really kind of provides a significant divide for the two of them. There's too much of the Catholic influence after the time of the Bible that Luther keeps that really drives Zwingli away from his ideas. And the two of them will never really see eye to eye on any really significant theological ideas. While the Swiss civil wars are going to be a significant problem to this. Zwingli and his movement is going to inspire a civil war to break out between the new Catholic faiths in Switzerland and the already established Catholic Church, new Protestant faiths in the Catholic Church. And this will destabilize Switzerland for a while. Civil wars will break out as to whether or not these new Protestant churches are legitimate, as to should they have legal standing, should they have certain rights. And in these conflicts, Zwingli himself will be killed. He believes that he should be fighting on the front lines with the soldiers and dies. Because of that, his influence isn't really felt as much as some of the later Protestant reformers, people like John Calvin, who live a lot longer, who are able to have a much more sustained influence on the area. When the conflict ends, Switzerland is going to do something truly revolutionary for the period. They're going to realize that religion does nothing but to drive conflict in this concept, if you're going to choose like what is the right one versus what is the wrong one. So there will be the idea of religious tolerance embraced in Switzerland. It will be the first place in all of Europe to really embrace it on a full scale. It's not just like what happened with the Peace of Augsburg where Lutheranism is allowed. It will be all the Christian religions will be allowed. And that's truly fundamentally new. No one was willing to do that to this point. So props to the Swiss for being the first, for being the pioneers. There's probably a reason why they consistently stay peaceful today. All right, so let's move on to our next Protestant reformer. The notion the mold is broken. Everything is different. And this is going to set the stage for a brand new theologian who's going to have dramatically different opinions on faith. It's the Anabaptists. Driven by a guy named Conrad Grebel, Anabaptists believe that it's not possible for an infant child to make a conscious decision about their faith and to really choose God. So they believed in the abandonment of infant baptism and the development of adult baptism. Kind of like how Catholics have a confirmation today, they would have conscious adults informed in their decisions, deciding whether or not they want to be part of this faith. They also believed in secular nonviolence. They don't believe in participation in wars, and in order to avoid that participation in wars, they believed that they should just avoid being participants in government at all, with a few exceptions that exist. And a big one out there is going to be in the town of Munich. In Munich, we're going to see this place completely ravaged by warfare, ravaged by the plague, and the Anabaptist Church, which was, prominent in the area, but not, any kind of dominant political source, because they don't believe in that, is really going to try to step in and stabilize the city after the plague just completely wipes out huge chunks of the population. And they see a significant problem that exists in the city at the time, and that is that there are way larger number of women in the town than there are men. And this is causing problems because at this time in Europe, the really only way for women to live is to get married and live with their husband. Once they reach adulthood and they leave their parents' homes, if they don't have a husband to go to, they kind of just wander the streets. They don't have jobs. They don't have a place for them to leave or live outside of that, so they're kind of just stuck. And there's a huge population of homeless women in Munich at this time for this reason. So in order to address this, to allow for men to take more women into their home, they're going to institute a policy of polygamy. And this is going to end the situation of women wandering the streets, but also makes a real bad situation for the rest of Europe, because they will look onto Munich as this aberration, as this horrible, godless city that is allowing polygamy to take place, and armies will march on the city. And in doing so, they will drive the Anabaptists out of Munich, and they will be scattered across Europe, never really having that strong influence in a single one area again. And they actually evolve from the Anabaptist movement to something that we're a little bit more familiar with, the Mennonites. And Mennonites are going to really consistently stay with the model of what life was like in the 1600s, 16th century, live that lifestyle without looking for much technological improvement. And then eventually they will come over to the United States. They will be Mennonite communities in the United States. But this idea of polygamy that was the issue in Munich isn't really going to consistently stay with the Mennonite community. But from here on out, they are being considered a fringe society. They are not a well-accepted Christian faith in the area. They're going to be very, very pushed to the extreme because of their beliefs in adult baptism. Other religious faiths that come out of this period that are also kind of extremes to the movement are going to be the spiritualists and the anti-Trinitarians. The spiritualists are identified largely by their hatred of organized religion. So for faiths like the Catholic faith, which is very organized, very top-down centric, and eventually the Anglican Church, they're going to have significant issues with this because they don't believe in this hierarchical structure that exists. It should be about a people's spiritual relationship with God, and you don't need other people to kind of tell you what that is. Anti-Trinitarians are very religious practicalists. They believe that a practice in a religion should make sense, and if it doesn't serve a purpose, it shouldn't exist. Symbolic notions for the sake of symbolism just are dumb. They should be very determined to make pointful improvements on the spirituality or life of the people doing them. So they're going to hate predestination when we get to it because it's not very practical. They're not going to like a lot of the symbology and what seems like just overindulgences of Catholicism. They're going to be really grounded in this idea of practical rationality to religion. So, these are kind of our fringe faiths that will also come out of the ideas of the Reformation. Now we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the two biggest, most important faiths that come from this period. First up, ready for this? John Calvin. You must submit to the supreme suffering in order to discover the completion of joy. That should give you a nice little hint as to what's coming in Calvinism here. John Calvin is going to be an interesting character during this period. arguably the most important person to this period, other than maybe Martin Luther, possibly more important than Martin Luther, depending on your perspective. Calvin comes from a Protestant or a powerful family and a prosperous family. Because of his strong education, because of his really grounding in the humanist ideology, he doesn't really move towards religion in the early portion of his life. Actually, is kind of a rare anomaly during this period, is probably best considered a 16th century atheist or agnostic, which really didn't exist during this time period, so he's a real unique situation. But when the Reformation begins, he's going to start to reassess religion, because he hated religion as it was. He hated the Catholic ideologies that existed in Europe at the time. But now that he can start to re-examine this faith and start to flavor it in his own way, he's going to start to re-embrace the idea of religion. Because through his studies, through his exploration of the sources, he comes up with a significant change in how people should approach Christianity. This concept is known as the elect. It is the key principle of a concept called predestination. The notion that God is omniscient, and therefore, since God is omniscient and can see everything that has ever happened, and everything that has ever will happen, and everything that is happening now, God has already determined who is going to get to heaven. Nothing we do in our lives will ever influence this decision. God will be able to do and will do whatever God chooses to do. We are predestined to either end up in heaven or to end up in hell. And those who are predestined to end up in heaven are the elect. So you can see from this graphic right here that there's really two ways that you see this. People who are born as part of the elect will live life in the image of Christ. They have God's grace on them, therefore they make decisions like Christ would make. And because of that, they will end up in heaven. We know these people are in the elect because they make good decisions. They are good people. They receive good fortune. This is God's way of reflecting His grace on these people. People who are not part of the elect will not act in Christ's image, will not be good people, will not do good deeds, will not help others, and therefore we will see their lack of grace on them, and because of that they will not go to heaven. This is unsettling for a lot of people. To not have any influence on how you end up in your afterlife is hard. And for a lot of people, it's not an ideology that will really stick well with them. Now, for those who it does make sense, they kind of view it as, well, I want to be part of the elect. I feel like I am part of the elect. Therefore, I will be a good person. And what we actually see born out of this Protestant faith, out of Calvinism, is an extraordinary work ethic driven around this desire to show that you are part of the elect, that you will work hard, that you will be a good person, that you are mindful of your actions and your thoughts. And that's going to be pretty powerful for the areas that truly embrace Calvinism. Very well organized, very efficient communities. And that's largely led by the efforts of John Calvin. So, where does all this take place? How does all this take place? Well, it takes place because Charles V has pretty much been absent from Europe for a while. He has been completely absorbed in this conflicts with the French and the Turks, allowing for people like John Calvin, for Zwingli, for Anabaptists and Conrad Grebel, these guys to develop their ideas, to implement them in cities, and to really see them thrive and grow. Well, eventually, when Charles is focusing back on the religious situation, he's going to realize that he needs to act in some way, and will actually attempt to drive people away from Protestant faiths. With the creation of the Diet of Augsburg, he is going to task all people who have converted to Protestant faiths to turn back to Catholicism. If they don't, they will be considered outcasts to the empire. They will therefore receive an imperial ban. Unfortunately, it's too late. You can't kill an idea. Once an idea started, it's kind of just going to run. And that's what ends up happening. The Protestants aren't going to back down. They're not going to just convert back to the ideas of Charles V, and what we end up seeing is a series of wars breaking out across Europe. The Lutheran princes in the Holy Roman Empire, part of the Schmalkaldic League, will wage war against the Holy Roman Empire and Charles V. They'll lose, but it doesn't mean they quit. They lose the physical war itself, but the ideologies of Luther and of these other Protestant faiths don't go away. You can't get rid of people like that. You can't get rid of an idea, the questioning of the church, these new beliefs that people embrace. And eventually Charles realizes this and realizes that these wars are tearing apart his empire, that are tearing apart Europe, are not what God would want. And because of that, he decides to end the religious conflicts in the Holy Roman Empire and in the lands controlled by the Habsburg dynasty, and grants the Peace of Augsburg. That will at least officially, politically sanction the existence of Lutheranism, allowing any princes in the Holy Roman Empire to adopt it if they would choose. What it does not do is grant any political consideration for Calvinists, for Anabaptists, spiritualists, anti-Trinitarians, for people who follow the ideas of Zwingli. So it's very limited in its scope, but at least it's a step in the, I guess, right direction. So that's good. All right, so let's talk about our last faith. And that is going to be in a place we have completely ignored this entire unit. We're going to England. And in England, we see the rise of Henry VIII, arguably the most important monarch in English history. Great video on it. Watch it in the notes. We're not going to watch it right here. But Henry is going to really be enamored throughout his entire life with the notion of having a male heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. If you remember, his grandfather is going to be the person who comes in, ends the War of the Roses. His brother is going to become the next king, and in doing so, we're setting the stage for things. But his brother dies at a young age after being married to a woman named Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. So we're talking like a pretty prominent family, prominent relationship, prominent marriage. Well, in attempts to maintain the allegiance that exists between the Spanish and the English, Henry is going to marry Catherine after the death of his brother. And eventually, Catherine is going to grant Henry a child, but it's a woman, a girl by the name of Mary. And the two of them will stay married for almost 20 years. And at about the end of the 20 years, Henry is now completely freaking out that he doesn't have a male heir, and decides that he needs to get an annulment from the Pope to find a new wife, to find an opportunity to get an heir. Well, the Pope is not going to divorce or annul the marriage to probably the most prominent Catholic family in all of Europe. Not only is Catherine the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, she's also the aunt of Charles V. Way too many connections here for the Pope just to give away a marriage between these two people. So he denies it. He refuses to allow it to take place. While Henry, in his frustration, is going to then decide, well, screw it. You can have your own faith these days. I'll start my own church. Boom. Passes something called the Act of Supremacy. This Act of Supremacy is going to make the King of England the head of its own English church. We're going to call it the Anglican Church, the Church of England. And in doing so, he is now able to grant his own divorce if he wants to. And he does. And in doing so, he's also going to massively frustrate a guy by the name of Thomas More, principal theologian in the area, devout Catholic, and he's going to speak out against what the king is doing, and because of that, ends up getting his head chopped off. So now we have a significant divide that exists in England. Catholics are outraged by what Henry has just done. A small series of conflicts breaks out in England. He stomps them down. People are upset with the execution of Thomas More. He doesn't care. And in doing all this, he really consolidates the power of the English monarchy in the king. And this changes Europe, this changes England. It really legitimizes and guarantees that there's never going back to the way things were before. There's now a state-sponsored religion in England. This is huge, folks. Now, for the story of Henry, it doesn't end here, as you guys are well aware. Henry's fascination and preoccupation with getting an heir is going to mean he's going to go through quite a few different wives. Catherine, 24 years, and he marries a woman named Anne Boleyn, who happened to be the handmaiden of Catherine of Aragon. She will grant him another daughter named Elizabeth, but no son, so then he divorces her, marries another woman named Jane Seymour. She does give him a son, Edward, but she dies in childbirth. He is traumatized by this, truly believed he loved Jane Seymour, eventually is buried next to her. Well, after Jane's death, he marries another woman named Anna Cleves, divorces her after 6 months, then marries another one, Catholic Coward, executes her after she cheats on him, and then marries another one named Catherine Parr, who will be there when he dies, partially because she made him sign an agreement saying that she will not be executed by Henry for whatever reason. So, this is huge. His desperation for an heir radically changes England forever, and upon his death, his son Edward will become the new king. Edward is a teenager at the time. He's not really fit to be king, and he's also not really all that healthy. He's been sick his entire life, and his only true accomplishment during his life is going to commission a man named Thomas Cranmer to create the Book of Common Prayer, which is kind of the Anglican Church's, this is how you be an Anglican person. What prayers do we pray? What practices do we have? What beliefs do we have? The key pieces of it is it does follow Martin Luther's idea that you have to have justification by faith alone. There are only 2 sacraments, baptism and the Eucharist, and that the bread and wine are only symbols for the body and blood of Christ. But Edward dies pretty early on. I mean, he never is healthy his entire life, and when he does die, he's replaced by his older sister, Mary Tudor, the daughter of Catherine, and all of these ideas of the Protestant Reformation are going to be completely reversed. Mary has been raised Catholic by her mother in Spain. It is not going to be a good transition. It is a disaster, but that is where we leave off for now. So we have now introduced a lot of new faiths to the Protestant Reformation. I hope this wasn't too confusing and that you guys can kind of keep it all straight. If you have questions, let me know, but we've laid it all out there now. Thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.